Welcome to the Cyber Agony Aunt podcast series, brought to you by your very own cyber aunties, me, Amelia Hewitt.
And me, Rebecca Taylor. We're here to tackle the most pressing questions that arise throughout your cyber career with a selection of very special guests.
Think of us as your very own mentors, confidants, and cheerleaders, your agony aunts for surviving your career. Hello and welcome back to the Cyber Agony Aunt podcast. Rebecca, how are you doing?
I'm all right. It's strange weather outside. I'm not sure I'm ready for autumn. But I have nearly finished my Christmas shopping because I am that person.
I don't even have a list yet, and that says a lot about who we are as people. But we have a very, very exciting episode today.
Gosh.
So we will divert from Christmas and my lack of general organisation skills.
So... oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm saying this. And I am fangirling, so I do apologise. But for this episode, we have invited an incredible leader, a change maker, and who we genuinely believe to be an incredible ally. Neither of us can quite believe that they're here. As a student of UCL and John Hopkins, this person has dedicated a large portion of their career and their life to the public sector and to keeping the UK safe from cyber threats. Special guest, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, good morning, both. It's great to be here. Thanks very much for the invite. It's exciting to get the opportunity to talk.
Amazing. So this is Mr. Will Lyne.
I didn't say my name, did
but
I?
that's okay.
Yeah, I'm Will Lyne. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
So this episode was actually quite challenging to plan because there are so many avenues of you and your career and what you do that we could pursue. But in our chat beforehand, we sort of came quite naturally to decide on sort of three key topics that we'll get into. So firstly, allyship. We definitely both see you as an ally, and without mentioning names, we know so many other people that feel the same way about you. So we'll definitely be digging into that. The second piece that came up when we first met was around resiliency. So cyber is a bit of a hamster wheel at times, as are a lot of careers actually. And I think by having you here with lived experience of being very resilient and building a very successful career, I think it means that you're probably very well positioned to talk about that. And lastly, we will cover a little bit of chat about the threat, but with a little bit of an inclusion spin. So without further ado, we'll dive into allyship.
Perfect. So, we've got a nice little thing to read out for you. According to Great Place to Work, we all know who they are, allyship in the workplace means using your personal privilege to support colleagues from historically marginalised communities. Allies wield their influence to amplify the voices and elevate the employee experience of their underrepresented co-workers. These efforts promote amazing things like greater diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging throughout the company. It's a lovely statement to start with, isn't it? So, I suppose, Amelia, I want to just ask you first, how has allyship really changed and supported your career? How does it feel for you?
I think inadvertently, allyship has been a really fundamental part of my career that I perhaps haven't appreciated enough, or I didn't appreciate when I was more junior. I came into cybersecurity from a very non-technical background. I did an IT apprenticeship, having probably not studied IT since I was about 13. And I have always worked in very male-dominated teams. I've also been considerably younger than a lot of my colleagues. And that was really challenging. And I think I found it challenging at the time, but on reflection, that was my Everest. And the allyship I experienced was really not in the sense of what you think of, where we think of sort of, there being sort of special provisions for me as a young woman, but actually it was that I was treated as an equal. Mm-hmm. And any instance where adversity could have happened, I think was often sort of nipped in the bud by my leadership before it could impact me. And I think that was a really clear example of allyship in my career. And as I've become more senior, I think that's become more overt, and sort of people calling out behaviours that are not so great and checking in on me and that kind of thing. And so I think it's shaped really the professional I've become, because I've had fantastic examples of leadership within my career. And, my business partner, Jim, is a really key example of that. as I said, I didn't have loads of experience. I think I'd done about 18 months of an apprenticeship when I came into the industry from IT. And he just took me under his wing. And, we worked together at the company we were at, and now we work together very, very directly. And so I think it's the piece of bringing people up. And I try to do that as part of what I do now as a leader and as someone with direct reports and that kind of thing. It's allyship doesn't have to look like these grand displays of I support women or I support minorities. Sometimes it just looks like giving people a fair shot.
I love that. And I think it is very much about having people's back, which I'm comfortable to say, well, I think you have a lot of people's back. And so bearing in mind, obviously, what Amelia has said, why do you think that allyship is so important, particularly when it does come to fighting cybercrime and to working in cybersecurity?
Yes, it's a really good question, isn't it? And I think it's something that I've thought about quite a lot before kind of coming on the podcast. Right? You wanna come in and yeah. So firstly, I think kind of like being an ally. There's a few things, but like that diversity and that allyship is an operational advantage for us. That's our big motivator, right? You don't go and join the public sector. You don't go and join law enforcement because you want to be rich or, because you want to work in nice offices or whatever that might be, right? You go in because you kind of really want to make a difference for the public. And, that's, I think, lots of people's core motivation. And I think actually, being an ally and, having diversity in your teams with everyone that you work with and your colleagues is an operational advantage for us. So I don't see it as a target or a metric that we should strive for, even though it can be those things. And sometimes they may be useful tools to and data to talk about. It's having that different cognitive diversity, having those different perspectives, having those different lived experiences, having those different thoughts and different pieces of creativity from people, and having that diversity amongst your team is really important. But I think one of the key drivers for me is this like concept that I didn't really know about much until quite recently, of like psychological safety.
Okay.
And so, what does that mean? I think that's just being approachable, being available, and empowering everybody in your teams and everyone that you work with to feel that they have a voice and that voice really matters, and that you are free to identify risks, point out mistakes, challenge assumptions, challenge people. And that's really important, actually. I think that's kind of, fundamentally, you touched on it. You can say all these big things, right? You can talk all the talk about, being an ally and diversity and all the rest of it. But actually, if you foster and enable a psychologically safe environment, that I think goes a huge way in terms of having a voice, having an opinion. Everything you say matters. And that's really important. I think massively important for us in law enforcement for a whole different host of reasons, for our legitimacy, for being ethical, being equitable, and being able to collaborate really effectively.
I think as well, when I consider it in relation to law enforcement, and this is obviously speaking as an outsider to the process, you can have exposures to lots of different types of crime. It isn't just cybercrime. So I think having that psychological safety, and that does filter, of course, through to cybersecurity, is so important in people being able to bring their full selves to that fight and to the effort. And like you said, the diversity of thought, the representation in your teams to almost in a way mirror the threats or the activities that you're digging into or fighting as such. It's really important that you have that perspective and that depth because, that's going to empower the team, empower you as an organisation to make a difference and to do good.
Yeah, I think it really struck a tone, actually, what you said around cybersecurity and cyber being this kind of word that sometimes, and I think I've probably been guilty of this in the past. I think sometimes we use that as a barrier, don't we? Or cyber, it's really difficult, it's really complex. No newcomer or someone who's worked on a different threat in law enforcement could possibly understand this. And then other times we're like, oh, no, it's not a barrier at all, actually. It's just bad people doing bad stuff.
Yeah.
So come in, you've got a really valid voice and opinion. And the two things can be true at the same time, and I think that's quite an interesting perspective. And so I'm always really careful nowadays of particularly using cyber as like a barrier. We're special, we're different, we're unique. You can't possibly do it. You need years of training and thousands of hours of it. No, that's not necessarily true.
And I think that's a lot of the myth busting as well that's going on at the moment. And we've spoken about it before, Amelia, in other episodes of cyber doesn't have to be technical. It is about bringing different skills and flavors.
Yeah.
But it is funny the way you say it, because there is this element of, I work in cyber and I fight the criminals.
Everyone finds it rather impressive.
Yeah, they do.
So then
they do.
Because you feel that validation of it, you carry on doing it. And it's almost like we're our own worst PR enemy as an industry. Because I did it. I get caught in the trap of, I wasn't technical. But when I joined the industry, that was how you got into it, I suppose. And we didn't necessarily have the same, the same roots in now as I remember. And so it's very easy to get caught in that trap of thinking, well, that's what you need to be in cyber.
Yeah. I think there's a lot more to be said for other skills now in the cybersecurity industry.
Yeah, we've got to lower that barrier of entry, haven't we, in many ways, because we know we don't have enough people in the industry in general. We definitely don't have enough people in law enforcement. We don't have the kind of like diversity of people that we want. And so I think you have to challenge some of that kind of gatekeeping type behavior, or that, spreading that mystique. I think it's, we've got to democratize the kind of access to knowledge and learning in this space, particularly as the threat changes and, cyber technology-enabled crime, but just becomes everyday crime. So, yeah, we've got to change that mentality.
For sure. Yeah, I could not agree more. And I think something I'd picked up on what you said earlier is the concept of equity as opposed to equality. And I think we hear a lot around equality as a real buzzword in cyber. And actually, having completely equal opportunities doesn't necessarily remove a lot of the barriers that a lot of marginalised communities feel. Because, for example, Rebecca and I are both women, wrote a whole book about it too. But we don't need the same equal opportunities because we have very different lives. You have children, you need different flexibility to what I need. And so I think that's another thing with allyship, is that rather than making it like a completely even playing field, it needs to be a playing field that meets the individual where they're at, as opposed to, we do all this stuff, so you must be completely fine.
And that's where allyship plays its part, right? It is understanding who you've got, understanding what the different people around you need to, and we've said it before, to thrive, not just survive. There's a little tagline for today. I hope you enjoyed that one. So I'm going to throw in another question about allyship. Allyship does come with being open to differences in your teams and communities, and it can often mean understanding that you do have a privilege or a platform that others might not have, and using that for good, for positive. For anyone in that position of wanting to be an ally but not knowing where to start, Will, what would you recommend? What does make a good ally?
Really good question, isn't it?
Thank you kindly.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think as you become a leader, and that you don't need to be in a leadership position to be a leader, is kind of quite an important one. I work in a relatively hierarchical organization, but I'm always really clear that you don't need to have the rank to be a leader necessarily. So really understanding your kind of like the shadow that you cast as a leader and your leadership shadow, I think is again quite an important thing for people to reflect on. How you behave and how you treat others and how you operate and how you engage is just so important. And a lot of it, frankly, and kind of, I think you kind of like touched on it, is being available and making the time for people, making the time to just chat to people, sitting out in the office with everyone as opposed to being behind a closed door, getting out to the different locations where people are, and just making the time to chat to people. It doesn't have to be about work. It doesn't have to be about the latest operation on the books. It could just be, how are you? How's things? How's life? Right?
Yeah.
I think there's just a lot about just getting out there and just being really authentic, being yourself. You can't kind of pretend to be someone different. I don't think you can't have your kind of like work hat and your personal hat. I think you have to be quite authentic. I think you can't keep that up in a role where, it's fast paced and there can be a little bit of pressure and there's always lots on. I don't think you can pretend to be someone else. But being authentic, being really thoughtful around the kind of like leadership shadow that you are kind of like casting and the way that you are coming across and the way that you are engaging and ultimately the way that you're behaving. I just think is so important, and just like a huge first step in kind of like going in the right direction for something that's really positive for both you and the people that you work with.
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing joke we have on the podcast that sometimes I say things that are slightly morbid, but it goes back to that point of people remember how you made them feel. And if you show genuine interest in people, and like that's a really key part of being a good ally, is actually being interested in what people need. And that's not just as a leader, that's as a professional, as a human being. And what really resonates with me with people I've worked with in the past is who is genuinely interested in how you're doing, what you need to thrive, what you need to just feel comfortable in your day-to-day, as opposed to people who do it performatively. And like I said previously, it's not about those big displays. It's about that everyday, small, consistent efforts we make into just ensuring that the people around us feel supported.
I do love that idea as well, what you said about the shadow. And I think, again, is something that I think we've spoken about before, where if you do work, like you do walk into your workplace and you're like in a rage, or you're looking entirely unapproachable, or you go in, you shut that office door and you're like, do not talk to me. That gives off an entirely different energy of maybe that person isn't someone I can trust, or I can talk to if there is something wrong, or that could be my sponsor or mentor or ally. So actually, like you said, being open, being accessible to people so they know that they can talk to you on a human level. I mean, this sounds really silly, and this is me being very open. The first time I met you, Will, I thought you would be like, hello, and who are you? And I'd be like, hello, I'm like lonely Rebecca.
Just going to curtsy.
I do have a habit of doing that. It's a whole complex issue. But actually, the fact you were so incredibly welcoming, and forgive me, but for want of a better word, almost normal, in the sense that you were just one of the people. It does make a difference on how I know that I feel, and other people in the community feel, that we can approach you as an individual, and that we can just have a normal human conversation and a chat about life. And it doesn't have to be, oh no, they're a senior representative of a very important organisation and they're not a person.
It's just being there, being a part of the team.
Yeah.
And chatting to people. And like, it's the small things I find that can help. So if someone comes to talk to you at a desk, lock your computer.
Yeah.
So you're not kind of like,
I'm terrible for
you're not looking at like a blizzard of emails, and then like stand up and be like, do you want a cup of tea? Or, and like stuff like that. I just like, it makes those interactions with everyone and like more authentic and better for a whole different host of reasons, both for you and them. So it's little things like that, just like habits I think you can get into that you sometimes don't even realize it, right? That someone's trying to have a conversation with you. You're also like half doing emails at the same time or something, right? So yeah, it's the little things.
On a side note on that, do you find as your role has evolved over time, the way in which people communicate with you differs? I mean, not to use Rebecca as the example there, but I imagine that happens quite a lot when you're networking in professional spaces. Have you noticed that to have changed over time?
Yeah, I guess so, a little bit. But I think it's about getting under the skin of it a little bit and understanding it better. So you might get the kind of like formal briefing on an operation, for example, that you're going to send up the chain to the leadership of the NCA or the Met, for example. But it's really important, particularly if it's a great piece of work, to go and chat to the people that have done it.
Yeah.
What they're learning from it, what they really enjoy. Are they going to celebrate it? Yeah, it's things like that. So yeah, just understanding it beyond the kind of what you get told on a formal piece of paper, I think can be really helpful. We can't do it for necessarily everything, but that's part of, I think, kind of like being a leader, having a good sense of what's happening and what people's thoughts and feelings are about kind of like work in general. Them understanding that you care about it more than just the operational result or the outcome. You care about them.
I think that's where, just reflecting on what you said as well, whilst the allyship is a continuous behaviour and like state of behaviour, I do think there can be a time and a place. So being able to own that space as a leader or someone driving a conversation, but also being able to still be there for people and adapt and evolve your behaviours in the way you hold yourself depending on what the mission is or who is around you. So, for example, where you were talking about having a briefing, it's probably not the right time for someone to wander in and be like, oh, Will, how are you doing? Do you fancy a cuppa? That's not the right time, because they know that also as our ally, that's where you have a different hat on potentially. So I think allyship can evolve and change depending on where you are and what is happening. But it's that constant undertone, and it's knowing that at the end of it, so after that briefing or whatever it might be, that you can go and have that side chat and be like, how did you find it? Are you all right?
Yeah.
Let's have a chat.
There's that point, in everyone's role, there'll be times where you'll have to be a more directive leader.
Yeah.
If there's a critical incident going on, for example, you can't have a chat with everyone in the corridor. But you don't necessarily want to be that all the time. And so it's just understanding that, and if you can't, if someone's come over for a chat and you can't meet them, but like follow back up with them so you can get that chat in, later in the week or when you're next both around. So it's not just a opportunity you just shut down.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I think we've covered allyship fairly comprehensively. Moving on to resilience. It's a hot topic at the moment. I mean, both in cyber and in the world, really. But I would say having personal resilience in cyber is both incredibly tough and incredibly important. And, we've all spoken about it before. Our world can be very cyclical, and there is definitely a bit of a never-ending feeling about some of the work that we do, especially, you take down one threat, another one appears, you complete one assessment, another one appears. And, even, GRC consultants to incident responders on the front line, it doesn't seem to end anywhere, and that is just the nature of what we do. So, Will, I guess if anyone did a bit of research on you, as I'm sure they might for this, they would see that in your line of work, you've been involved in a lot of takedowns and you have a lot of lived experience in cybercrime and subsequent arrests. So could you please share any experiences of having to fight these fires, but also remaining resilient in yourself?
Yeah, I think
it's very poignant.
Yeah, I mean it's tough, and I think it's a really individual thing. So everyone out there in the community feels it, right? Is what I'm doing impactful? Is this just a kind of like whack-a-mole endeavor? Is this just all a bit hopeless, and is this all a bit pointless? And I think it's really interesting. I think actually one of the things you have to do as a leader, you're the kind of person that I think sometimes you really have to bring that hope to people.
Yeah.
You really have to be that conveyor, that distributor of kind of hope in really difficult circumstances, and maintaining the positivity. Because you can go and deliver a huge piece of operational activity or whatever it might be in the community, have an extraordinarily busy day, have some successes, and then kind of you feel like you're at the bottom of Mount Everest again the next day, don't you? You're like, and now we've got another 2-year slog till we can kind of like all enjoy the next one, for example. And that's really difficult, isn't it? So, I mean, what do I do personally? I mean, don't take yourself too seriously, I think. And I think that can be an important one. You say, if you deliver success, you should enjoy it.
Yeah.
I was chatting to people on the teams the other day, and we did a little bit of recognition for some work that they'd done, and they were like, "This is really nice to actually, we've not just moved on to the next fire. We're kind of actually taking the time to kind of enjoy our success." And it always reminds me of a time when we were working on Evil Core, actually, so I was over in the US as a liaison, and the kind of date for the Evil Core work in 2019 was all kind of set. It was a particular set day. I think it was like November, December time, and I kind of like persuaded a big boss from the NCA to kind of fly over. To be there to kind of like go and do this podium announcement of it all. And literally, as he was like 2 hours away from landing in DC, having persuaded him at the last minute that it was worth his time coming over, the event got cancelled and postponed 2 weeks. And I was kind of on the call, right, and I could feel the kind of air going, like the wind going out of everyone's sails. And I was like, I had to go and pick up my boss's boss from the airport and be like, oh well, it's great you've just done 8.5 hour flight, but
you can go back now.
But it's like putting your front foot forward then, and kind of like geeing everyone back up and taking it as a positive. And actually, the boss boss is really great about it. And it's just learning from those experiences and taking time once you've delivered stuff to kind of like reflect. We never do enough of it, right? I don't think you can do enough of it. What's the measurement of effect? What's the impact been? What's the learning? Kind of what was the positives, the negatives of everything? You've got to really take the time and try and bake the time into what you do to understand all of that, so you can take it and do it better into the next endeavor that you undertake.
I'm interested, Rebecca, sort of from your perspective, because we all work in quite differing areas of cyber, how you remain resilient, because I think you and Will do sort of similar things. You can so tell that I work in GRC. But I can imagine that's quite interesting because you have a lot of information overload in sort of threat intelligence and research roles. And so how you remain resilient will probably look very different to how I do within consultancy.
I think the main way that I personally remain resilient is by talking and sharing, obviously in safe spaces, about what I'm experiencing. So I don't try to dress it up if I've seen something that has bothered me or hurt me. I don't dress it up if I'm like, oh, come on, like I've got all this information and this research and I don't feel like I'm getting anywhere. Because I think it can feel like that a lot, where you just keep chugging and you keep digging deep, but nothing magic is happening and this threat actor's continuing to do horrible things, whatever that might be. So I think it's about being vocal personally with my leaders to say, this is how I'm feeling and I'm finding it hard. I think it's about building in downtime. So you do have the separation and you do get the breaks, particularly if you are dealing with troubling or challenging content or material, making sure that you are stepping away and you have spaces again to talk about maybe what you're seeing, or if it's troubled you or hurt you or triggered you, whatever that might be. I think they're really the main ways, but I do personally get a lot of boost when, probably similarly to Will, when I've done that piece of research or I've seen that piece of TI and it turns into something more, whether that be we're able to alert a customer that something has happened and they can make a proactive choice or decision and protect themselves and avoid maybe something bad happening, or whether that be, I don't know, finding a piece of research and being able to distill it out that somebody else can be safe.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's super important. And I think maybe I'm going to come in with a slightly controversial take on that, is that sometimes I think we forget that this is just our jobs. And especially in an industry where we are doing such positive things that can sometimes feel a bit sort of hard to quantify. But I notice this a lot when I speak to people, is that they don't consider who they are outside of their achievements professionally. And I think as part of being resilient, you have to have that multi-dimension to who you are. And by having hobbies and things and outlets outside of work, mean you can show up as a more resilient person inside of work. And I think the work that you put in outside of the 9 to 5, and I'm saying that with sort of air quotes because we never do 9 to 5, just 9 to 5. But I think that piece is really important to remember, that you are so much more than what you've achieved. But if your entire sense of self-worth is on what you achieve, it can be very hard to be resilient when, you know, things are quite challenging in the workplace.
Yeah, it's kind of, it's not your work isn't your everything. You've got to have your kind of whatever it is you want to do in your kind of spare time, your family, you're playing football, well, whatever it might be. I think you've got to have that outlet. And I think, it can be tough and it can be relentless. And so I think, sometimes just taking that step back and kind of like taking that deep breath, I think then just putting your next step forward, I just think is so important. And as I said, like not taking sometimes yourself too seriously, letting everything about work kind of like define you, letting, a bad day at work create a bad bedtime with the kids. It's you want to break that kind of cycle. And so, yeah, I think really important and really good advice.
100%. That bringing the work home, especially when it's been difficult, is never a good idea. Because like you said, it does then feed into how home feels and how you maybe emotionally are with your friends and everything else. And it can turn into a pretty messy situation if you can't keep almost like a grip on it and an understanding that you are more and you are safe and you are okay.
Yeah. And as you say, kind of like talking it through is just often so helpful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just going back and reflecting on it informally, the psychologically safe way, right?
Yeah.
Just be like, kind of we screwed that up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or we could have done that so much better. And kind of like letting people put it out there and not just listening, but then taking action on that, so that kind of what they've said kind of like actually then means something for making the workplace better in whatever way, shape or form that is moving forward. That's pretty important, because it's no point kind of like capturing the learning from all this kind of stuff, and we're learning all the time, and then kind of do nothing about it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, you both say about not letting work come home with you. And I think that's really challenging with the fact that we have a very remote first culture in cybersecurity. Most of us are working remotely for either all the time or a lot of the time. And I think the challenge with that can then be that it's so easy for those lines to be blurred, and that impacts how you show up. And so I guess the advice, the thing I would say around that, I suppose, is making that effort. And as you've said, Will, to be present in the moment of who you're talking to, what you're talking about, because otherwise it can be so easy when you go home to be talking to children or your partner or your family, and all in your head you're just constantly thinking about what's happened that day at work and not what you're talking about with them, and vice versa when there's something going on at home. Being present in work and using that time to focus on what that person is saying to you almost helps you build that separation, which I think makes you more resilient in both work and home.
No, I absolutely agree. I think it's really hard. I think all I would say is when you are dealing with that challenging incident, you may bring the laptop home, right? And that may be looking at you from the corner, but there is that difference between bringing work physically home and bringing it into who you are and how you communicate and how you behave. So I'm definitely not an expert, because I can be terrible. Like, I'm not going to dress it up. But we continue to try to strive to be better.
Yeah, it just can be relentless. See, I've heard people that work remotely saying that like moving thever home office to like the garden shed or whatever has made a massive difference to them, just having like a little bit of physical separation. But there's also stuff you can do, if you work a little bit late and you work in ways that are kind of like convenient and helpful for you, but don't necessarily impose that on others. So that then goes to your leadership shadow. Like if you're emailing kind of lots of people on your team at 9 o'clock and they're kind of picking that up on their phone, for example, is they're relaxing with their partner, whatever it is they're doing that evening, are they then going to feel a bit of pressure to like, actually, do I have to get my phone now and do it now? So it's like, why don't we just put that in my drafts and just I'll send that tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
So it's, we can all be guilty of that at times, right? So it's just, again, just those little things you can think about in terms of, I don't need to trouble everyone with the phone going at 9 p.m. I'll just send it at 9 a.m.
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan now because I've been historically extremely guilty of that, and I would never want anyone to think just because I'm working that they need to be working. The schedule send feature is that because I will forget to send it in the morning. So, but if I can schedule send it to go at 8:30, 9 o'clock, it's not on my conscience to think about, I must do that. So then I'm not stressing. And then it's not on them at 9 o'clock, because we all do it. I get in bed and I look at my work emails. I wake up in the morning, I look at my work emails, and it really starts you off on the sort of wrong foot of the day if you've received something that's a little bit tricky or something you need to deal with or that might be stressful. So it's maintaining those boundaries, but not just for yourself, but for the people in your teams and the people around you, because they are also people with lives as well.
It's trying to stop that always on kind of culture. And the boundary.
Yeah. Or stacking up meetings in your day. So you literally have a day where you're just like back to back. And that awful feeling of like rushing, being 3 minutes late to every meeting back to back whilst eating your, like trying to wolf down your lunch at your desk or something. It's like, it's not like a great feeling, is it?
No.
And like, actually, it was a few years ago that I was actually like, I don't need to do this. I just need to kind of like overschedule the time that I block out, and then like always have time to just block out to kind of get around the office and chat to people, or just like do something different as opposed to just being chained to Teams or chained to meetings all day. Because like that can be like, they can be the worst, almost relentless weeks, can't they?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, it sounds really silly, but like I miss the days of having to print things out in the office, because that time where you'd go to the printer, go and make a coffee, you'd chat to people, and those sort of water cooler conversations, which is a very, very American way of saying it, are really valuable, because as you said earlier, it makes you more approachable because you're just chatting with other people, and we're never really talking about work when we're doing those things. It might be how's your day going, or what you're doing this weekend, but they make a big difference. And I think the remote equivalent of that, and I hate it when people just send me a, "Hi Amelia, how are you?" And you get that anxiety of knowing that
What do
they're
you
going
want?
to ask you for something. But I will schedule in little check-ins with people in my team just to ask, recently did the 3 Peaks challenge, and a couple of days back into work, I called one of my colleagues to say, how are your legs feeling? Like nothing to do with, work, but just that chat that you wouldn't necessarily have if you weren't in, an office.
Yeah. I think that's what people probably know me for at work, is they just ring. I'm like, all right. Just ringing, because it can be lonely working at home all the time as well, but just to have the natter, because then, like we've touched on it before, that's when you then know if something's up, you know how they work, you know what's on their plate, you know what you can ask them for, what isn't the right time, because you've taken the time to understand them as a human and as a person. So digging into the next question for you, taking into consideration, Will, your experiences and that of your teams, how do we all keep inspired to keep fighting that good fight and keep that resilient mindset? Have you given up the will already?
No, I think, it is that motivation for those wins and to kind of like do good. We're really lucky in the field that we work in, aren't we? So, yeah, I think it is... that opportunity that whatever you're doing, it's all contributing to making a difference. Everyone in the team, everyone in the organization, we're kind of like all working towards those goals. Whatever piece of that puzzle that you're fulfilling and that you're building. And it is genuinely, I've had the privilege of working with amazing people and delivering some hopefully really amazing and impactful outcomes that, have genuinely made a difference for the public. And that's definitely what keeps you going. And that's definitely what keeps you as a public servant or working in kind of like sectors like cybersecurity. It is those wins. I think it's kind of addictive in a way, isn't it? I think
can be.
In a weird kind of way. It's it's a huge motivator, kind of like doing cool stuff, doing innovative stuff, just like seeing people go and do amazing things, collaborating with incredible partners. Yeah, it's a great job. I've kind of like loved all the different roles and different bits of work and all the different people, because like ultimately, like all of these things, it's all about the people. Loved it in my career.
I think it is about clinging on to those positive moments, like you said, because I think we can be very overwhelmed by challenges and troubles and negative incidents or relentlessness or whatever that might be, and you can end up a little bit suppressed by the process, or it'd be like, oh god, it's another
exhausted
one.
by it,
like mentally cooked is probably the description I would use.
We like that phrase.
I do love that phrase because I think it's a good description. I was like, I know what that means. But it is clinging on to the hope and the positive and those relationships and seeing the magic when it happens. That's when you get the little buzz and you're like, all right, maybe I could keep doing it.
The collaboration and the people building, working with amazing people. I think also that psychological safety is a really important valve to avoid burnout.
Yeah.
It's nothing worse, is there, than just like you feel you can't get something off your chest for whatever reason, or you're really hating what's going on and you haven't had a chance to kind of like have your voice heard, or you kind of said something but it's not been listened to, because like there's a two-way process, right? Like you have to feel safe to say something, but you also have to feel like you've been listened to. And so again, like it goes back to that same concept, doesn't it? But like doing that really well, I think can be really important. But it is tough. Like, don't get me wrong, it can be really difficult. But I think that's where being that kind of like source of hope, I think is really important.
I think we've spoken about it when we had a brief for the podcast, is, we're probably in quite privileged positions where we've been able to see the impacts of the work we do firsthand. Mm-hmm. And I see it a lot with the work I'm doing in sort of privacy, where the knowing that you're protecting people's data, that's a lovely feeling. I really like, whereas I can also appreciate that other people are maybe not in roles where they feel that they have that sort of constant inspiration from what they're doing. And so I guess the key thing around that is doing something you're passionate about. And I know we all say that, and I know it's a lot easier said than done, but it makes a fundamental difference to how you show up in the workplace if you like what you do and you like who you do it with. Because ultimately I could be doing like the most monotonous task, but if I'm doing it with people who I genuinely like and who I genuinely feel supported by, I'm a lot more inclined to continue doing that and feel that I can continue to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like to talk about like 3 broad things I want to do with people. I want to kind of like recruit and bring really good quality people in. And it doesn't matter your background, your kind of, skills, experiences, whatever that is. But, kind of good people are good people, right? Mm-hmm. And you want to develop them so that they can leave. but you want to treat them well enough so that they don't.
So
And I think if you,
well articulated.
if you do those kind of three things really well, you're not going to go too far wrong. Because, I work in economic and cyber. Those are probably the most kind of saleable in the private sector, where people could go and probably earn better money or whatever elsewhere in the private sector from within law enforcement. But it's giving them amazing opportunities to do amazing stuff, giving them world-class training, giving them world-class bits of work to do that you perhaps couldn't do elsewhere, and then treating them well enough so that they're like, yeah, cool, I want to carry on doing this.
I love that. And I keep saying this, it's so true. It is true though, isn't it? Is to build people up so they're into it and they get it and they want to keep going, but they want to do it with you because they believe in you as your leadership and your mission. And just tying back to what you said, Amelia, as well, I think if you can't get the buzz in kind of the way of actually seeing what you're doing turn into convictions or arrests or, I don't know, protection of a customer or environment, I think that's where as well leadership of those particular teams and in those environments really do need to keep that positive reinforcement up so people understand they are making a difference and they are doing good.
Yeah.
To share good news when they can, even if that's telling a story. So how a piece of what they did went to another part of the organisation that led to XYZ. It's really important to have those stories so people know that they are part of that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, storytelling is something I've seen grow in like real popularity as a concept in the last sort of 5 years or so. But it does make a difference. And the other thing I would say, probably linking back to what I said earlier, is finding your own why. Because, for example, in the line of work that I do, it doesn't lead to arrests and convictions, or not directly. But I love the feeling of knowing that the people I'm working with feel more empowered and in control of their security and their data protection, and that confidence and knowing that I'm making a positive impact on how they feel about a topic that is so taboo still in wider societies. Cyber is still something that is very not well understood. That's why I do it. And I think, even if you're in an organisation where their values and what they do it for doesn't necessarily resonate with you, by having your own North Star and taking some time to reflect on what that might be, I think that provides a lot of that clarity and a lot of that inspiration in a role.
Here's a question, Will. Here's a curveball for you. What's your why, if you want to share? Why do you do it to yourself?
To yourself.
It sounds like I'm kind of like John Torture. No, it's not. I just really enjoy it. I really enjoy the kind of like the subject. I'm kind of like naturally interested in the kind of field and cybersecurity. Great people and great opportunity to do really kind of like impactful work for the public. And that's it, really.
I love that. My why, as soon as we're all sharing, I think I do it because I just want people to be able to make the choice to be safe. I think everyone deserves the right to be safe online, on the streets, whatever that might be. And if I can play a part in that education and that awareness, then I'm up for it. I just want people to have a choice.
Yeah. I think impact, I think you spoke so well about impact. I think it's really interesting, isn't it? So I think sometimes in cyber in particular, you particularly law enforcement, you can be held almost to like a higher bar sometimes on impact because you're often not delivering your traditional criminal justice outcomes. That's kind of like a lot of the bread and butter of what we do in law enforcement. And so you do get the questions of like, you delivered this disruption, what was the impact? So I think you often can naturally be quite more inclined to kind of think through that kind of like the impact of what you're doing and what the difference is making, because it is, I think, a little bit different to what large swathes of other bits of law enforcement do, where kind of like, that traditional criminal justice type approach is a big chunk of the work you do.
I think as well, perhaps, maybe it doesn't feel like this to you, but perhaps to your benefit is, because cyber is becoming a lot more spoken about in mainstream media, I think there is slightly more appreciation, and actually we're able to see the impact of what we do as an industry because it's being spoken about more. Whereas previously it almost felt that we had to explain that a bit more. Yeah. Whereas when we see it on, every week on BBC News, I see something different, and it's causing more conversation. And so I can actually see the impact of people feeling more reassured that organisations like yours, that the work they're doing is doing something positive.
Yeah, it's been a busy year, right?
It's interesting you say that though. So I was getting ready this morning, the sun wasn't even up. And like you said, cyber is much more of an individual topic now, and almost like people being inspired to be more accountable to themselves and their own safety. So I think it was this Good Morning Britain today, they were talking about romance scams and how there's a much higher percentage of individuals falling to romance scams. But a few years ago, I don't know that would have been really a mainstream topic. I don't think I would have seen Eamon Holmes having a chat about that a decade ago. So the fact that it is being brought more into the limelight and being a more normalised conversation, it can only be positive. I think if we can sow it in individuals, that is naturally going to filter through to organisations and hopefully a nicer, more positive cyber environment.
Yeah, totally. I think we are moving past that kind of, I think, probably quite outdated perspective, looking at like the impact or harm of like lots of economic crime or cyber crime as just like a sheer financial loss.
Yeah,
that you get the money back from the bank, so it's a bit of a victimless crime. I think that's a really one-dimensional, I think, really antiquated way of looking at it. Actually, the impact of lots of this criminality, whether it's sophisticated or not, it's enormously harmful from a whole different range of perspectives. It's not just the fact that person's lost money.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lady called Catherine Nibbs, I think her name is, who is a specialist in cyber trauma. And that was not I'd worked in cyber for quite some time before I came across what she does. And actually, she looks into that piece around how cyber actually impacts people as opposed to, it's actually quite terrifying. I've had my card cloned a couple of times. Goodness knows where I've been shopping online. And that's one thing. But when you see that alert come through where a transaction has been made and it wasn't you, yes, my bank might give me that money back, but the anxiety that causes and the sort of loss of control you feel about money is a very, very personal thing. That's something we haven't really accounted for in the way that we do now. And so I think it's really important that we're having these conversations. And I think with people talking about it more as an industry, we can understand how to better support the wider public. Yeah. Okay. Again, I think we've covered that very comprehensively, and I have the joy of moving us on to the conversation around the threat. So, Will, to level ground for both myself and everyone listening, how would you define the threat within cybersecurity?
Oh, it's a good question, isn't it? And it's an ever-changing question, or an ever-changing answer, I should say. So, yeah, I mean, so the way that I think about cybercrime, and I'm not saying it's the best way or the right way, but I just think it's a really helpful way for me to kind of like contextualize it in my head, is that you've got this kind of online cybercrime ecosystem. So it's the kind of like the tools and capabilities that enable people to go and kind of like build criminal schemes, for example, on the internet. I think it really drives two main trends. It lowers the barrier of entry to get into cybercrime. So it's easier to get into cybercrime or kind of like any kind of online offending now than it's ever been. And I think it proliferates tools and capabilities that are ever more powerful. So you get those two things combine in like quite a powerful way. So you get increasing numbers of people find it easier to get involved in cybercrime. And then that increased number of people find it much easier to get their hands on really powerful, sophisticated weapons and tools. So when I first started working in cyber, kind of like the best tool that you could probably go and rent on the internet was like some sort of like DDoS type tool that you could use to kick your mates like dial-up internet off the internet. Like, that's showing how old I am, right? Whereas now, it's like pretty frighteningly easy to get your hands on some like really powerful capabilities. And I think that kind of like drives some of the trends that we're seeing in this space at the moment. So from the cybercrime perspective, you've got your traditional kind of like ransomware groups that we've known and we've tracked and we've been tackling for quite a long time. But you have this increasing kind of English speaking groups that are victimizing as well, that are taking advantage of that lower barrier of entry and proliferation of tools and capabilities. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
So kind of touching on what you just shared there, I think there is this perception that the threat is typically male, maybe from a certain nation or demographic. But we're seeing, particularly by some of the recent arrests, that actually the threat might not be as clear cut as that. And actually, like you just said, the bar is far lower than I think people truly realise. What do you think, and how do we best prepare to defend, protect and respond to a diverse threat?
So, I think kind of the playbook for defenses, I think, stays the same in lots of ways. What do that kind of like new breed of perhaps English speaking threat actors bring? Like really sophisticated social engineering skills, for example. But actually, I think from a cybersecurity perspective, doing the basics really, really well. And that's much, much easier said than done, right? If I did the basics of football really well, I'd be a pro footballer, not working.
I sense a dream career there.
So, but doing the basics really well, so patching your internet facing infrastructure, training for your people. It's not just technical, right? Yeah. Actually, the human element and risk around humans of cybersecurity is also really enormous. Multi-factor authentication, strong passwords. If you do the basics really, really well, again, I'm not saying that's an easy thing to do, you do protect yourself from a really significant chunk of not just the cybercrime threat, but actually the kind of online threat in general.
Yeah, I mean, I think the diversity piece is really funny because I've heard it, and I'm sure, Rebecca, you've had it in your career. You don't look like you work in cybersecurity, which is really interesting because when I think about the threat that we defend against, to hear that, women are arrested and things, I think, oh gosh, I'd never have thought of that. And I say that as a cyber professional. And so it makes me wonder if these sort of stereotypes are sort of exacerbating some of the issues we see around social engineering. Because, for example, I've done physical pen tests before. I am less likely to get questioned if I'm in my suit, heels with a clipboard than maybe a male colleague because, well, I don't expect you to be causing problems. You're a young, respectable looking woman. And so I think that is really interesting, is that threat actors can use diversity to their advantage if we're not training people to spot for that. And I think it is that point of training people as opposed to sort of relying on those technical defenses, because we know social engineering, especially in supply chains, is a really, really big issue at the moment for us as an industry. But we haven't necessarily, or from what I've seen, addressed what we do about that on a sort of human level.
I think it is about expecting the unexpected.
Yeah.
I'm doing a bit of research at the moment because I'm going to do a talk next month about the role of gender and how gender can be used from a cybercrime perspective. And actually, the role of female can be used in abstract ways, whether that is someone on a forum giving off the persona of a female to maybe drive a certain type of crime or to attract a certain type of victim, whether that is actually the role of an actual woman. And like you said, Amelia, the arrests that we've just seen, the amount of people that reached out were like, oh, who knew a woman could commit a cybercrime? And I was like, yeah, they have laptops and everything.
Some of the
Can you
jokes
believe
have been
it?
hilarious. I saw something saying, do you think she got paid the same as her male colleagues?
That's awful.
And we joke, but it's like, that's the perceptions we still have, and we make these jokes, but you don't expect that, and that came as a massive shock because we were away when that happened, and whilst we laugh and that kind of thing, it does happen, and I think that does then show that actually what we thought we were defending against and what we actually might be defending against are not the same thing.
I read this interesting statistic even where, is it ISC squared that said there's like 28 or 30% of people in cyber are women. Well, that could mean that actually there's 28, 30% of individuals in cybercrime are women too.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that and I was with a group, they were like, do you really think that's true? That there's that many women doing this stuff on the internet? Like, goodness me. Like I think elements of that are to do with gender roles. And like our typical views when you say, what does a cyber criminal look like? You're like, oh, it's a dude in a hoodie. Yeah. And he's drinking Red Bull and he's quite angry at life. But it isn't that anymore. And I think that's where us as a collective cybersecurity industry need to be dispelling those myths, breaking that down, telling the stories so people really have their eyes wide open when they're perceiving the threat for themselves.
But it's that having a diversity in your teams is an operational advantage.
Yeah.
Right? Like bringing people that may not think in the same way or have different perspectives to the type of threat actors that you're going against is massively helpful in trying to figure out different, innovative, cool ways of trying to disrupt them.
Yeah.
That diversity is only a good thing. And there is more that we should do and will be doing as a community to kind of get more representative. But yeah, we should leverage our diversity as a strength in the fact where, whether the adversary is or isn't.
Yeah.
If we are, that can only be a good thing.
I think the additional point there as well, and the benefit of us having diversity of thought, is that the landscape of people who fall victim to a cybercrime is no longer your grandmother. And anyone can be, all it takes is one small lapse in judgment or anything like that to fall victim of economic or cybercrime. And so it's very interesting in understanding how we can train people better is to understand how they might think and how they might feel. And that was something that really, really came up in the early parts of my career. I remember working with the head of cyber awareness at the law firm I worked for. And she said, it's not about how you or I would perceive receiving information. It's how people who are very high fee earning lawyers who have spent 12 hours looking at a computer would read that phishing email and how they would respond to it. And so I think by having, and it's especially true for people who come into the industry from other careers, having a bit of an understanding of how the normal non-cyber person thinks is actually a really good way for us to build better defences.
So I suppose throwing out there then as our last question, go on, Will.
It's just one point on that, because it's just like, it's something I've said quite a lot, but I think it's really important, is that like sophistication when it comes to cyber doesn't equal, like the more sophisticated something is, it doesn't equate to how harmful it is or the impact of it. And I think we've kind of, in the past, it's probably been that way. The more sophisticated the actor, the more harmful they are, right? And we've been pretty comfortable with that correlation, haven't we? There's a pretty positive correlation. And that no longer holds true. And I think that's quite an important thing to get your head around from a, defences perspective. And I think from thinking about people.
Yeah.
Because you can have the best, all the gizmos on your device and computers and, the best secure system in the world. But, if all of your people, I don't know, you have the same basic password that they reuse on every other platform that they have, then like you've got a problem.
Yeah, that's so true. It starts with humans. It starts with people. I think we see it a lot that people are the weakest link, which is not the nicest phrase, but unfortunately in lots of circumstances when it comes to being cyber safe and protecting organisations, it is the human that clicks on the phishing email. It is the human that downloads something that maybe they shouldn't have done. So just reflecting on the last question we have for you today, and it kind of touches a lot on actually what we've already spoken about, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So cybersecurity can feel quite abstract for people in their daily lives. I think it can often be, unless it happens to you, you almost don't take it seriously or believe it as much. So from your perspective, how do we get individuals, how do we get people in the everyday to take cybersecurity at a personal level more seriously? And what role do you see organisations in the public sector in making that shift easier and more accessible?
Yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it? So, crime is increasingly moving online, and that opportunity, that provides the opportunity for new crimes that didn't exist before to now be a possibility. And it allows kind of traditional crimes, in air quotes, kind of stuff that you could do in the real world, but it's just actually much easier to do it on the internet. And so, it's now kind of like fraud and cyber, I think is kind of like over half of all reported crimes. So this is really big. You're much more likely to be a victim of fraud or cyber than you are of any other crime type in the UK.
That's fascinating.
And I think, it's trying to, in a way that's not scaring people, right? Yeah. You don't want to try to, because our lives are all increasingly technologically enabled, and we are all living an increasing part of our lives on the internet, right? And so, that's where I think you mentioned, if you have some money taken out of your bank account, it kind of feels, it's sort of like a real violation, isn't it? It's a real violation of your kind of like what you think is your personal online space in some respects. So it's conveying to people, a sense of the threat that the internet operating online kind of poses in a way that doesn't try to like frighten the life out of anybody. I think that you can kind of like scare people to be more cyber savvy or more secure, and then give people the kind of like the knowledge and the information to operate and live securely and do what they want to do on the internet freely.
Yeah, I agree. And I think in another episode with Nikki Webb, she was sort of using a metaphor around, we were talking about mental health and, you wouldn't let someone on a building site with no PPE and no boots and things like that. I guess it's putting it to people in a way they'll understand, in the same way that you wouldn't go out and leave your front door unlocked and leave a sign saying no one's home, and you wouldn't go and stand on your balcony and yell your personal information. It's almost applying those same concepts to the online world of, well, it's very much the same thing as the physical environment, but it feels a lot easier to divulge those things or not act securely when it's not in a physical space. So it's putting it to them that way. The other thing I would say and call out we are doing very well in the industry is some of the outreach and accessibility initiatives, especially in schools. I have to obviously bring up the work we do at CyberAid, because we do so much work to make cybersecurity accessible for charities and the third sector. And I think it's about being good examples and of what does good look like, what does secure look like, and making that approachable, because it's very easy, the glamorized world of cybersecurity, it's very easy for other people to think that that's quite complicated. Whereas if we are lowering that barrier to entry of what good practice looks like, we can enable more people to do it in a much more sustainable way.
I think that's entirely true. I do think it is about, if I think about the everyday individual, it isn't necessarily people that work for organisations that have had a piece of security awareness training. You've got this whole selection of young individuals. You have these older community members that have had technology almost thrust upon them, and now they're existing with it around them as part of their lives. So it is about appealing to those different groups, those different demographics, making it easier to not only implement, but also easier to know where to go if something has happened and if you need help.
Yeah, I kind of totally agree. I think Jen Ellis talks really well about kind of like steps you can take. And she's like, you can't kind of thrust like 7 or more 10 things that people should do. You should just say, do this one thing and do that well and implement it, and then kind of like go on to the next thing. And I was like, that's actually like a really nice way of thinking about it in some respects. It's like, look, for the next week, just improve the security of your passwords or whatever they might be, enable multi-factor authentication. And I think, that's really interesting. I reflect a lot on the operational results that we deliver in law enforcement. Actually, a lot of, and we need to do better at capturing this as a metric for impact. It's like actually a lot of it is about hook to then do a media story. And then the most powerful segment of that is the kind of like the chunk of the interview or the quote or whatever it might be to say, this is how you might be able to protect yourself from being a victim of a similar type of threat.
Yeah, leveraging what you've been given.
That's probably the most impactful element of your entire operation, is the reach that operational hook will give you. And so we have a responsibility in law enforcement, as does, I think, the whole of government. I think the government does take this kind of like whole government approach through the National Cyber Strategy to being, it's incumbent on us all to do that. And that is a really powerful metric, because it's really difficult to prove. How can you prove that you protected anyone? It's really hard. But it's getting that message out there, and that's really important.
Well, I think a really good example of that I've seen was, there's a documentary called Murder by Text, and it's about the EncroChat operation and the work that the NCA did there. And the number of people in my life outside of work who have watched that because they saw the hook and they thought, oh, true crime, and then messaged me to say, I had no idea that organisations like the NCA did work like this, that had such a massive impact on society and an ordinary sort of everyday non-digital crime. So I think those pieces of media are actually doing so well for bolstering how people look at cybersecurity. And, I know that having a snazzy title that draws people in is great, and they're probably more likely to engage with that sort of media than the news. But I think it's that ongoing awareness piece that we can do within limits, talking about what we're doing as an industry and actually some of the really exciting wins that we've had.
I love that. I think that's a beautiful place to do a nice little wrap up for us. So, incredible chat today. Thank you, Will, genuinely, for joining us, for being so honest and open, and also for the difference you're making in keeping people safe. It's amazing. There are lots of takeaways here, I think, for everyone, really, on resiliency, allyship, and on really understanding the threat, maybe as it pertains to you lovely individual person. We do hope that it does give you some food for thought.
So, to end, as always, if you have any other questions about any of the topics we've spoken about today, please pop them through to cyberagonyaunt@gmail.com, and we'll do our best to reply there, or maybe, just maybe, as Rebecca says, even cover it in a future podcast. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please share it with others or post about it on social media using the hashtag CyberAgonyAunt.
As always, a huge thank you to our guests, to Matinee Multilingual, and to you, our listeners. Keep smiling, keep shining, and we'll see you next time on the Cyber Agony Aunts podcast.